In the sun-baked town of Abba, where dust rose with every passing breeze and hopes often died before they could grow, lived a boy called Paul. He wasn't special in appearance. He wasn't loud. In fact, he was so quiet that people often mistook him for someone with nothing to say, but inside his small, wiry frame beat a thunderous desire, the desire to serve God. He was just 17, but Paul already called himself man of God. His father had died early, a mason who fell from a roof and never got up again. Since then, it had just been Paul and his mother, Mama Grace, in a one-room wooden shack behind the yam market. His mother's face was carved by struggle, her hands calloused by survival, but her eyes always glowed when they looked at her son. Paul had an old Bible. Its pages were torn and yellowed, curling like dry leaves caught in harmattan. The spine had cracked long ago, and some chapters were missing, but Paul read it like it was gold. To him, it was the voice of the heavens. He built his first church from refuse wood and broken planks. The structure bent like tired bones. The roof was made of leftover zinc, patched with old sachet bags and pieces of cloth. It creaked in the wind. When it rained, it leaked like a basket. When the sun burned hot, the place felt like a firewood stove. Still, Paul went there every Sunday. Every single Sunday. He arranged 10 white plastic chairs, wiping each one carefully. No one came, not even the curious. Only the wind visited, sometimes bringing dust, sometimes dry leaves. But Paul still stood on the dusty makeshift altar. He lifted his arms. He prayed like the world was watching. He shouted like heaven was taking notes. His voice echoed off the zinc roof and bounced back at him, the only amen he ever heard. Children in the town nicknamed him Pastor of Empty Benches. They mocked him. Some threw stones at the roof while he preached. Others called his church a goatshed. One man sneered at the market. This boy is wasting his life. Even his shadow no day say amen. Still, Paul didn't stop. He would preach, sweat, pray, and return home with sore feet and sore hope. But his mother, Mama Grace, was always waiting. She was no soft woman. Her face was like a grinding stone, her back permanently bent from carrying yam baskets. But her heart was warm like late afternoon sunshine. When Paul returned home, dusty and discouraged, she knelt before him, wiped his feet with a damp cloth, and said, "Don't stop, Paul. Your star is hiding now, but it will shine, and when it does, the world will feel the heat." She believed in him completely, not just as her son, but as her calling. She sold yam by the roadside, counting every kobo she made. Even when people haggled like demons, she never forgot to set aside God's portion, which meant Paul's ministry. One Sunday night, after yet another day of preaching to no one but the wind, Paul sat outside the church. The moon was thin, his hands were dry. His eyes stared at the dusty ground. "Mama," he said in a whisper, "I'm tired. Maybe I didn't hear God well. Maybe I'm chasing wind." Mama Grace was behind him, peeling yam in the moonlight. She stood up slowly, her wrapper stained with oil and dust. She came and sat beside him. "Paul," she said, "this world does not reward clean hands. It rewards those who know how to enter deep waters." Paul looked at her, confused. "What do you mean, Mama?" She didn't answer right away. She touched his shoulder gently. "If you follow me tonight, your life will never be the same." He blinked. "Where are we going?" "Into the bush," she said. "Into the truth behind power." They carried nothing, no bag, no Bible, only feet, only faith. The road was dark, quiet, and long. No one saw them go, and that was the beginning of something that would shake the town, the state, and eventually the nation. But before the fire, there was a walk through darkness, a long walk, into trees that whispered, into wind that warned, into something waiting the night, swallowed them whole, and somewhere deep in the woods, something ancient opened its eyes. As the sun rose over Abba the next morning, FireSpring Ministries was already alive with activity. The prayer warriors were shouting in tongues, the ushers were arranging chairs like soldiers in formation, and the media team was testing their equipment with the dedication of a military operation. Pastor Paul stood on the pulpit, eyes closed, hands lifted. The Spirit, or what he had convinced himself was the Spirit, surged in his veins like hot oil. Mama Grace watched from the front row, her eyes sunken, her spirit disturbed. She had not slept all night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of the girl whose soul had been exchanged in the forest. She saw the white handkerchief burst into flames. Yet, she could say nothing. She was in too deep. And Paul? He was no longer her son. He was something else. That Sunday service was a spectacle. People were carried into the church on wheelchairs and walked out dancing. A woman with a tumor on her neck screamed as it disappeared mid-prayer. A man who had been blind for 6 years fell to the ground and wept as sight returned to his eyes. Cries of "Man of God, Prophet of Fire" filled the atmosphere. Pastor Paul didn't break a sweat. With one wave of his handkerchief, people screamed, fell, convulsed, and were delivered. Every miracle was real. But every miracle had a cost. Paul knew this. Mama Grace knew this. But the congregation only saw the fire, not the ash. Outside the church, whispers began to stir. Some said they had seen Pastor Paul walking barefoot through the town at midnight, whispering to himself. Others claimed a black crow always circled the church every Friday at exactly 3 a.m. Then came the woman from Umuk. She was old, wrinkled like dried fish, with one eye blind and the other sharp like a hawk's. She came to a midweek service and stood still for the entire worship session, saying nothing. When Pastor Paul walked past her, her blind eye rolled and her lips trembled. She whispered, "You carry fire." "Yes, but whose fire?" Paul froze. The atmosphere chilled. Mama Grace stood quickly and led the woman outside. But by the time they reached the exit, she had vanished. That night, Paul's dreams were filled with fire, not divine fire, but consuming fire. The girl from the sacrifice reappeared in his vision, holding the flaming handkerchief, her eyes hollow. "One soul cannot fuel eternity," she said. "Your altar is leaking." Paul woke up drenched in sweat. Meanwhile, back in the village, trouble was stirring. A small group of women had begun gathering outside the church compound late at night. They were dressed in white, faces veiled, feet bare. They said they were praying for the soul of Abba, that a dark spirit had entered their town wearing a pastor's suit. They didn't speak Paul's name, but everyone knew. And in the house where Mama Grace lived, the mirrors began to crack one by one. Paul sat alone in his office, long after everyone had gone home. The lights were off, save for a single candle flickering on his desk. His Bible lay open, but he wasn't reading. He stared at the flame, watching it bend, twist, and dance, like the fire inside him. But this fire, it no longer felt holy. He reached for the white handkerchief on the desk. It was folded neatly, but the edges were burnt, as if it had touched hell and returned. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. Visions slammed into his mind: a girl screaming in a forest, blood soaking the earth, a crow perched atop a rusted cross. He dropped the cloth. Just then, a knock at the door. "Come in," he whispered. It was Deed, the newest member of the media team, a young, bright-eyed girl who had left her job in Lagos to serve in the church. "Sir, sorry to disturb you," she said, stepping in nervously. "There's a visitor. She says she's your mother." Paul stiffened. "Mama Grace is home." Deed shook her head. "No, sir. This one, she says she's your real mother." The candle flickered violently. Outside the office, an elderly woman sat calmly in the waiting room. Her skin was dark and leathery, her eyes glowing with an ancient light. She wore no shoes, only a long black wrapper and a beaded necklace with a wooden crucifix. Paul stepped out, heart pounding. The woman looked up and smiled. "My son," she said, "you have walked too far into the fire." He stared. "Who are you?" "I was there the day you were born. The day they gave you to her. Grace raised you." "Yes, but your soul came from the hills. And now, it is time to return." Paul stumbled back. This is madness. But deep inside, something shifted. A memory unlocked. A forest, a stone circle, drums, a woman crying. That night, Paul followed the woman. They walked through the quiet streets of Abba, through fields and thick bush, until they arrived at an abandoned shrine. She knelt and began to chant in a tongue older than Igbo. Paul fell to his knees. The ground split open. From it rose a hand, charred, feminine, trembling. The girl from the vision. She looked Paul in the eye and whispered, "Free me." And suddenly, the handkerchief burst into flames in Paul's pocket. He screamed. The veil between heaven and earth had torn, and judgment was pouring in. The udala trees stood silent in the moonlight. The girl, or the thing wearing her skin, stepped forward. The women didn't flinch. These were no ordinary grandmothers. These were fire readers from a time before the Bible came to Abba, when spirits were not cast out, but fed, when prayers were songs in forgotten tongues. Mama Grace spoke first. Who are you? The girl smiled. I am a debt, a promise, a punishment. Are you Neka? Grace asked, that the name floated like a forbidden spell. I was. I became what your son unleashed. One of the women, Mama Ojiugo, raised a staff carved from the oldest Iroko. It pulsed in her hand. We are not afraid of you, Nika grinned wider. But you should be. She lifted her hand. A gust of black winds spread. The Udala leaves burned in silence. No crackle, no flame. Just ash. At FireSpring Ministries, Paul was unconscious. Not, sleeping sealed. Deaconess Ifeoma dragged him to the baptismal pool. She had seen this once before, when a pastor in Omohia tried to summon angels and called something else instead. She muttered prayers, not to cast demons, but to bring back his soul. But it wasn't just Paul. All over Abba, strange things happened. Children woke up speaking Greek. Chickens laid eggs filled with blood. The statue of Saint Michael in the Catholic Church wept tears that stained the floor like wine. The spirit had been summoned, and it was spreading. Mama Grace led the women in a chant, a war song, one that hadn't been sung in 200 years. The earth rumbled, trees bowed. But Nika laughed. Still don't understand, she said. You think this is about revenge, about that night, but it's not. She pointed at the sky. The blood opened the gate, the fire burned the key. But the branch shall choose. What branch? Asked Mama Grace. You will see when the tree bleeds. Then she vanished. That night, the Udala tree bled. A deep red sap oozed from its bark. It formed a cross, then dripped into the soil. Where it touched, grass died, and from the dead patch of earth, a hand rose, a baby's hand. Soft, pink, alive, and crying. The women screamed, but Mama Grace stepped forward, picked up the child, wrapped him in her shawl. He's the branch, she whispered. He's the one. A flash of lightning cut across the sky. Thunder cracked like the sound of chains breaking. Back in the church, Paul gasped and opened his eyes, and in the spiritual realm, Nika stood before an altar made of fire, smiling. It begins again. The crying baby held in Mama Grace's arms wasn't ordinary. His tears shimmered like oil under moonlight. His tiny fists clenched and unclenched with unseen force, and his breath came out like smoke from burning herbs. The other women circled in. Mama Grace laid him on the black earth, where the blood sap had touched. She pulled out a red handkerchief, one passed down from her grandmother's grandmother, embroidered with 3 ancestral glyphs. She wiped the baby's forehead and whispered an old name. The crying stopped in that silence. They heard drums, but there were no drummers. Far across the town, in the ruins of an abandoned seminary school, Paul stumbled to his feet. His clothes were damp from the baptismal pool, and his eyes were still half glazed with a vision of something too big for a human mind. Fire, he mumbled. Hands of fire, holding 13 stones. Deaconess Ifeoma helped him stand. You saw the altar. He nodded slowly. The altar of 13. She looked terrified. It's not supposed to exist. It was only legend. 13 blood oaths, sealed before the arrival of the white man. They were never broken, Paul said, only buried. Back under the Udala tree, Mama Ojiugo knelt and pressed her ear to the ground. The earth spoke in groans. Something ancient is waking, she whispered. The baby opened his eyes. They were golden. Suddenly, he sat up, unnatural for a newborn, and pointed toward the west, toward the seminary ruins. Mama Grace did not hesitate. We go. But he's a baby, one of the women protested. No, said Grace. He's the branch, and he knows the way. As they journeyed, the world around them warped. Time slowed. The stars rearranged themselves. Animals watched from the shadows, not with fear, but reverence. Paul and Deaconess Ifeoma were already at the gates of the ruined seminary when the women arrived. The baby leaped from Grace's arms and walked. Yes, walked. Each step he took left a glowing mark on the ground. He stopped before a burnt-down chapel. Its charred altar still stood, with 13 circular indents. Paul stepped forward. I saw this in the vision. The baby raised his hand. The 13 indents glowed red. From the shadows they came, 13 figures, hooded, faceless. Their bodies flickered like candlelight. The branch turned to the altar. He placed his hand in the center. Fire erupted. Each hooded figure dropped to their knees. They began to chant in unison. Hakpipa, Nagbadu. The bones that burn Hakpipa Nagbadukulu. The altar cracked open. Inside it, 13 stones, each carved with a different sigil, one for each covenant, one for each sin. The branch touched the first. A wail echoed through the land. In the physical world, churches cracked, mosques echoed with distant thunder, the utility split in two. Paul fell to his knees. What have we awakened? Mama Grace stood firm. Not what who. The baby, no longer crying, turned to them. He now looked older, not in size, but in gaze, in the way eternity lives behind a child's face. The debt must be paid, he said. Everyone froze. He touched the second stone. Rain fell, not like water, but like ash, each flake carrying a memory of something buried, betrayals, broken oaths, blood spilled in darkness. The seminary ground began to shift. The burnt chapel pulsed like a heart. From the soil, bones began to rise, not skeletal remains, but glowing marrow, as if the earth remembered every name ever whispered in covenant. Paul staggered back. These are the witnesses. Deaconess Iphima clutched her Bible. It trembled in her hands. Mama Grace and the women formed a circle around the branch, whose eyes now shimmered with lightning. The third stone glowed. The moment he touched it, screams erupted from the wind. Not screams of pain, but confessions. I stole the goat. I poisoned my sister's womb. I made my vow, then married another. All around the town, mouths opened unbidden. People whispered secrets they'd buried for generations. Every sin ever sealed by blood began to surface. Inside the chapel, the branch hovered above the altar. He no longer walked. He no longer blinked. He had become fire wrapped in flesh. The hooded figures wept. The fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh stones ignited in a single breath. Mama Grace's feet lifted off the ground. Her hair turned silver. I remember now, she said. We were the gatekeepers. You broke your watch. One hooded figure whispered. No, she said. We paused it, hoping it would never be needed. The branch spoke. His voice was no longer a child's. Every debt carries a cost, but the final one is paid in choice. He touched the 8th through 12th stones. Each one lit a fire in the sky. Constellations rearranged. Rivers flowed backward. A baby was born in a jail cell. An old man rose from a coma and began speaking in lost languages. Then he stood before the 13th stone. For weeks, Pastor Paul remained hidden from the public. Rumors spread like wildfire across Abba and beyond. Some claimed he had traveled to Israel for a special retreat. Others whispered that he had gone mad. Only Mama Grace knew the truth. He was in the forest. He had returned to the altar, not as a man of God, not even as a man of blood, but as a man who had lost everything. The fire that once filled his hands was gone. The dreams were silent. The spirits no longer whispered. Only the well remained, the cursed, red-stained well, on a stormy Thursday night. The villagers heard a sound they hadn't heard in months, a thunderous bell, FireSpring's ancient warning bell. It rang by itself. Those who lived near the church rushed out, barefoot and in fear. The bell clanged 12 times, each louder than the last. Some said it was an omen of death. Others said a spirit had escaped the sanctuary. When the elders arrived, they found the bell tower empty. But something else drew their attention. There were footprints, bloody footprints, leading from the church doors to the forest. Paul was kneeling at the well, his eyes hollow, his body soaked in rain. He held the torn pages of his father's Bible, and then he heard it again, the cry, faint, far below. Paul, he leaned over. The well glowed, not with fire, but with light, holy, brilliant, painful light. He gasped, he began to weep, and for the first time in months, Paul prayed, not to the spirits, not to the altar, not even to his father, but to Jesus. Far away, in a small hut, a girl opened her eyes. Her name was Ada. Her soul had returned. Mama Grace sat beside her, clutching her hand. The veil was torn, the well was sealed, and the final debt had been paid, but the scars would remain. Forever.